Now that we've reviewed various types of stratification, how do they come to be? For the next several slides, we're going to talk about theories of stratification. Social stratification focuses on the social inequality that exists in society at large. Therefore, the two perspectives that have something to say on this issue are conflict theory and structural functionalist theory. If you'll recall, in the conflict perspective, conflict theorists believe that society is held together by conflict and coercion instead of function. From a conflict perspective, society is based on groups competing for scarce resources. Some groups have more power and resources than others. These groups with an advantage do not want to share with those groups who are at a disadvantage. Conflict theorists believe that society is ruled by the privileged elites. These ruling elites, who have the most resources, tend to dominate, and exploit the less privileged groups in society. According to conflict theorists, inequality allows elites to control the distribution of resources, enforce laws, and influence value systems. Thus, the lower classes in society experience blocked social mobility. Just as individuals within a society can be ranked according to power, property, and prestige, so too can countries around the world. There are rich countries and there are poor countries. The term global stratification refers to patterns of social inequality in the world as a whole. The degree of stratification that exists in a society can vary. Below is a description of some of the characteristics of the global system of stratification. There are three main classifications for global stratification. These new terms are the result of recent cultural and political changes. The three classifications are most industrialized, industrializing, and least industrialized. For most industrialized, countries with the most modern industrialized economies would fall into this category. Most of these countries have moved into the post-industrial phase of societal development. Examples would include the United States, most of Europe, and Japan. These are the wealthiest countries of the world and have the highest standard of living. Most people live in homes with electricity and indoor plumbing. Most children attend public schools, and people in these societies have the longest life expectancy. Average annual income per person ranges between $10,000 a year in South Africa to $35,000 a year in Norway. These countries make up 18% of the world's population, but enjoy 79% of the world's total income. The second category are those industrializing countries. These are economies that are in the process of industrializing on a mass scale. They still have a reliance on small farms and businesses. Examples would be Russia, Eastern Europe, Mexico, and the Philippines. Average annual income per person is between $3,000 and $10,000 a year. Some groups of people, mainly those living in cities, have prosperous lives, while many living in rural areas struggle with poverty. People in industrializing societies make up 70% of the world's population. The last category is that of the least industrialized. These are economies where there is little industrialization. A large percentage of the workforce is employed in the agriculture sector. Much of Africa, parts of South America, and some Asian nations fall into this category. These are the poorest nations of the world. Many citizens do not have access to electricity and indoor plumbing in their homes. They have the lowest life expectancy. Average annual income per person is less than $3,000 a year. People in least industrialized countries make up 12% of the world population. The daily life experiences of people around the world vary greatly depending on whether they belong to a developed, developing, or least developed country. In terms of income, the gap between the richest and the poorest countries is clearly quite severe. To the sociology student, the question of how did the world's nations become stratified is an important one. How did world inequality occur? Below is a list of some of the explanations that sociologists use in describing world stratification. Modernization theory falls under the structural functionalist approach. This theory states that the whole world was poor up until the first European countries began to industrialize. Modernization theory explains global stratification in terms of technical and cultural differences between nations. Western European cultures produced advances in technology that spurred the Industrial Revolution, which created an environment that allowed the development of capitalist economies. There are stages to economic development that all societies must pass through. High-income countries then can play an important role in the economic development of low-income societies. We'll talk about this more towards the end of the PowerPoint. This can be accomplished by rich countries exporting and promoting the use of birth control technology, teaching high-tech farming methods to poor nations, introducing machinery and information technology which raises productivity, and by providing foreign aid for large projects such as irrigation systems and power plants. According to modernization theory, rich countries are a part of the solution to the problem of global stratification. The culture of poverty theory falls under the umbrella of structural functionalism as well. This theory is the only stratification theory which attempts to place some of the blame of poverty on the poor society. It looks at internal reasons for poverty. This theory believes that poverty is perpetuated from one generation to the next because of cultural factors of the society. Such cultural factors could include a desire to cling to traditional ways, a distrust or fear of technology, or religion. This theory became quite popular in the United States during the 70s and 80s in explaining poverty in urban areas and why people were on welfare from one generation to the next. The two theories described here have a perspective of wealthy nations being helpful or beneficial in reducing stratification and poverty. The theories outlined next will see how rich countries are a part of the problem, making poor countries economically dependent and in debt. For the record, the culture of poverty theory has been largely disproven, although it still maintains quite a following in today's society. Colonialism explores the process by which one country takes over another country. This is usually done by force. Under colonialism, the mother country will exploit the resources of the host country. Raw materials are shipped back to the home country to be converted into products for sale. Countries that have been colonized are expected to purchase their finished products from the colonizing country. The colonizing country creates a social structure, such as government, laws, and schools, for its own benefit. Many of today's least industrialized countries have had a period of colonialism in their past. Colonialism allowed the economies of countries like Great Britain and France to grow, while the country that was occupied saw its economy stagnate. Most of the world's nations that were colonized have not seen their economies recover since. The sociologist Emanuel Wallerstein developed world system theory to explain global stratification. World system theory argues that no country can be seen in isolation and that there exists a world economic system that must be understood as a single unit. The term globalization is often used with world system theory. It explores how the capitalistic nations' economies, in particular, have become tied together over the past few centuries. According to this theory, the world has developed where there exists a camp of wealthy nations and a camp of poor nations. At the center of the world economic system are the rich, powerful, industrial capitalist countries that control the system. These are called the core countries. Around these nations are the semi-peripheral countries. These countries occupy an intermediate position in the world system and include such countries as South Korea, Mexico, and Turkey. The semi-peripheral countries are at a middle level of income and are partly industrialized. They extract profits from the peripheral countries and pass the profits on to the core countries. At the bottom of this system are the peripheral countries. These countries are poor, not industrialized, largely agricultural, and manipulated by the core countries, which extract resources and profits from these countries. They are mostly in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. This world economic system has resulted in a modern world in which some countries have obtained great wealth, but other countries have remained poor. The core countries, that is, the Western European countries, and the United States and Japan, make themselves wealthy by exploiting the resources of the peripheral countries at low prices. At least, that's what the world system theory suggests. Dependency theory is closely related to world system theory. This theory looks at results of European colonization and imperialism. The persistence of poverty exists even after the colonial power has left. The least industrialized nations have grown dependent on the most industrialized nations, both politically and economically. This theory argues that the poverty in the world's poor nations is a result of exploitation by the wealthier nations. An example would be the term banana republic. This term refers to countries in Central America, such as the Honduras, Costa Rica, and others, that have a limited number of resources to offer for export, sometimes just one, such as bananas. The economy of this country becomes linked to the economy of the country or countries which purchase the product, such as the United States. So, for example, as long as India was dependent on Great Britain became wealthier and India remained poor. Countries that produce oil, such as Saudi Arabia, would also be an example that fits dependency theory.